Mhm. All right, welcome to the fourth and final session of the National Volunteer Week 4-H Volunteer Lunch and Learn sessions. Today is Thursday, April 25th, and we are excited to have a guest speaker with us today. Jennifer Epp is a 4-H Youth Development Extension educator here in Nebraska, and I'm going to quickly just let her introduce herself, and then I want to launch a poll before we get started. So Jen, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Jill. And I appreciate the little delay in time because Burwell has a very loud noon whistle just right across the street. So makes it a little hard to hear right at noon. But my name's Jen, and I'm the 4-H educator in Garfield Loop and Wheeler counties. And I'll come back to this slide, but just so you can see my information. So I've been here for about 10 years. I'm the only 4-H staff in my county, so I get to do just a little bit of everything. I get to be involved in the state fair as a static superintendent. And I've got some experience in South Central Nebraska. Before I came here 10 years ago, I spent 3 summers working with Phelps County. So some diverse experiences with an extension, and I think it should be relevant to our conversation today. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I'm going to have a poll question pop up on your screen right now. And you should be seeing it now. It says, please rate your level of confidence of using ages and stages to plan 4-H experiences. So please vote on what your level of experience might be at this time. And if you have never heard of it, that is okay. You were in the right place today. So feel free to vote according to your experience or even if you've heard of it. All right, I'm going to end the voting here. So it looks like we've had most folks vote so far. And Jen, this is where we're at. It
Oh, kind of
looks
variety.
like we have some variety and also have some wonderful attendance or audience members today because they're looking to learn something new today. So that is fantastic. I'm going to stop that. And Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you guys for sharing that with me. It's good to kind of know where we're starting, and it also lets me know that we've got room to grow today, which is a great thing. So I'm going to be sharing with you about the ages and stages of youth development and really what you need to know as volunteers. And I will say, even as a staff member, I come back to this resource again and again and again. When I'm feeling stumped, when I'm planning a program, I think, okay, what does this age really need? Where are they at? What can I do to help make this a really engaging experience for them? And so we're going to go through an introduction, which you've already had, a bit of a disclaimer about ages and stages, what characteristics specifically we're looking at, and then we're going to go through each of the age demographics that we have within 4-H, starting with Clover Kids and early childhood, all the way up to our older teens that are aging out of the program. What do they need at their different ages, and how do we accommodate them, whether that's in that club setting that we're preparing our club meetings and our business meetings, or if we're a project leader and we're trying to figure out how to engage each of the ages that might be attending our projects. And then lastly, what are some of the implications? You know, if we're not doing our ages and stages right, what might actually be happening that isn't good for the positive youth development experience? And we'll end up with just a little bit of practice and leave some time for you guys to ask questions as you have them. So I've said before that my name is Jennifer Epp. I'm the 4-H educator in Garfield, Loop, and Wheeler counties based in Burwell. So I'm located north of Kearney, about an hour and a half if you're not familiar with that part of the state. And really lucky to be here. I really enjoy Burwell. You can maybe see a little bit of it through my window. My husband and I live close to Calamus and just really enjoy the beauty of the sandhills here. So our disclaimer, every youth develops at their own pace. So I know some people come to 4-H volunteering through different ways. Maybe it's because you had a really great and enriching experience as a 4-H member yourself, and now you want to give back. Maybe it's because you have really strong skills in a project area and you're figuring out how can I translate these skills that I have into helping youth develop. And for some, it's maybe because they have an interest in youth, and that's why they're coming. And so we know that people have a variety of experiences with the youth themselves and their developmental levels. So just recognizing every youth is going to develop at their own pace. If you're a parent, this is probably something you're already very much aware of. Every youth is going to be impacted by their unique environment and experience. And so as educators, if we have the context that that youth is living within, it can be very helpful to us, making sure that we're providing an experience that's going to be developmentally appropriate for them. But we're not always privy to that information. We don't always know what a youth's home life is like. We don't always know what experiences that they've had in their past. So we have to do our best to do what we can for them, but recognizing that some of those environmental experience pieces might change their age and stage a little bit. So what we're talking about today is specifically what's typical and average for an age. Youth this age are typically doing X, Y, and Z. But we know that depending upon a variety of factors, like genetics or educational experience, that might shift where they are in terms of age and stage. And then lastly, youth are motivated by different preferences and interests. And that's going to be a huge one, especially when we're thinking in terms of projects. If a youth is motivated for a project, that changes the game. If they're not motivated for a project, that's going to change everything too. So keeping these pieces in mind that we're thinking from an average, typical perspective. But if we have youth with developmental disabilities or we have youth with delays, that this might be something that looks a little bit different. So we're looking at 4 characteristics today. And if you have experience with youth who have IEPs or IFSPs, you might say, oh, they've got a whole range of characteristics that aren't necessarily categorized in the same way. And you'd be right. Every academic wants to categorize things. But today we're sticking with physical, intellectual, social, and emotional, and breaking down what those look like at each age level. So on the physical side, how are they developing? How are they growing? What do their bodies need? What do their bodies want to do? Intellectually, how are we going to stimulate their minds? On the social side, how are they going to behave in relation to their peers, in relation to adults? And then emotionally, in that mental health piece, where are they at? And how can we help them grow? How can we respect the boundaries that maybe they need to set? And how can we respect maybe the emotional state that they're in at that age? So for early childhood, and you may be thinking, I thought early childhood was earlier than this. Well, we really say early childhood as a whole, you might hear is birth to 8. So for the purposes of 4-H, we're talking about that 5 to 8 age range. So the entirety of Clover kids are going to fit into this early childhood. That first year of true 4-H, we're still really kind of in early childhood mode. There's so much important development that happens in early childhood. So on the physical side, if you've been around young children below the age of 5, you know that those first 3 years, growth is huge on that physical side. But when we get to that 5 to 8 range, growth really slows down. It's slow, it's steady, but we're still learning how to do our gross and fine motor skills. We're still learning how to work with our own body. So still having those practices like using our scissors, it's going to be helpful in that 5 to 8 range. And they love to learn through physical activity. So if we're leading a project or we're leading our club meeting and we have a solid group of 5 to 8-year-olds, that's making sure that we're keeping things up, we're keeping things moving, and recognizing that it's probably not something we can expect from them to sit and focus for an extended period of time. That's not really within their developmental ability. So on the intellectual side, they're more interested in process than product. As a project leader, that's going to be something that helps you. They want to do the things, and they're not necessarily always concerned with the end product. Some youth are. But this is a fun stage. They want to explore. They want to understand. They're curious. Their thinking is going to be a little bit more concrete. So trying to throw things at them that might be hypothetical or abstract is not something that's going to be within their abilities. They have to have experiences with things to attach new knowledge to it. So if you're teaching this age group, trying to figure out what experiences they have had and how you can connect this new thing that we're exploring to something they already understand. They're excited to try new things. And I think that's what makes this group fun to work with. There's always plenty of enthusiasm. So on Monday of this week, I had the Mobile Beef Lab in Burwell. And it's funny to watch each of the age groups because K through 12, every grade went through the Mobile Beef Lab. And if you're not familiar with it, the university has 2 steers that have fistulas. So the students can reach their arms inside the rumen and examine the contents of the rumen of a beef animal. And as you can imagine, some of the older youth have fears and hesitations. But do you think the kindergartners or first graders in this early childhood demographic had any fears? No. They said, step right up. I want to try this. I am happy to stick my hand inside of the stomach of an animal. So don't worry about the gross factor. This group is excited to just experience and try. But recognizing that they have a short attention span. So if we are going to be doing something with them that takes a little bit longer, trying to break that up into manageable chunks that we're transitioning and we're keeping them moving so that they don't get bored and check out. On the social side, they're learning how to be friends. They might have more than one best friend. And so if there's one thing I remember from child development that's really stuck with me is that youth don't tend to learn right and wrong from adults, even though adults tend to think that's true. They learn right and wrong from their peers. And this is how they learn it out on the playground, learning how to be friends, figuring out what makes a person say, ouch. That's how they learn what's wrong. So making sure you're allowing them some social time so that they can build relationships. And that's what we're about in 4-H, right? Making friends, building relationships. On the emotional side, this group can be sensitive to criticism and failure. So trying to put them in a position to succeed is going to be something that we can do as club leaders, project leaders, and they are dependent upon adults for approval and affection. So if you're seeing them doing good things, behaving in the ways we like to see them behave, making sure that we're reinforcing that behavior by heaping praise when we can for the things that we want to see. So that's early childhood in a nutshell, and we're going to keep rolling unless you have specific questions about early childhood. So in middle childhood, we're looking at 9 to 11-year-olds. So in my mind, we're looking at kind of that older elementary side. They still have the enthusiasm, lots of energy, but we're seeing on the physical side that girls are starting to mature in upper elementary where boys are maybe lagging a little bit behind. And so we want to be cognizant of that when we are planning any activities that might be on the physical side. We don't want to call attention to that necessarily because some of the girls may be approaching puberty. But as a whole, this group is increasing muscle development, strength, balance, and coordination. So if we can incorporate physical activities that allow them to practice those things, then that's going to be something that's going to help them enjoy the experience. On the intellectual side, their attention span is still on the shorter side, but longer than it was in early childhood. So recognizing that we don't need to transition quite as quickly, but we're still needing to build some transitions into longer activities to make sure we're keeping them engaged. Their interests change rapidly as they're exploring the world. They're learning new things. They're jumping into new ideas, and that's what we want to see from them. And we're looking at the beginning of our true 4-H career too, this 9 through 11. So exploring new things, trying new projects, figuring out what's going to stick. But one thing that makes it difficult in terms of planning lessons is there is a wide variation in reasoning and academic ability in this age group. So for some of them, they're picking these things up and realizing that the logic and reasoning pieces are clicking. For others, it's going to take a little bit longer for those pieces to really set in. So just recognizing that in terms of your own ideas of their abilities. But this group's still eager to try new things, and I think we need to capitalize on that as much as we can. On the social side, they enjoy group activities and cooperation. So I know when I'm going in to do school enrichment projects, I do a lot of group activities and cooperation. They like being on teams, especially when things get a little bit competitive. They build group identity so quickly. They're creating names for their teams and creating mascots. And so if you can find a way to make that fun, that's an easy way to bring this group together is through groups and teams. But they're becoming more aware of gender and gender differences. So we don't necessarily want to call a lot of attention to that, but just recognizing that their self-awareness is really starting to blossom in this age group. They're just starting to notice, hey, I am different from the other people than me in this room. And I think that's where 4-H and positive youth development can play a role. And we can help them recognize that being different is not a bad thing. Everybody's different. Everybody has different strengths, and how can we make the most of the body and personality and whatever that we're given. They do require guidance from adults if we want them to perform to the best of their ability, but they're also going to be starting to lean into independence as they get towards the end of this middle childhood age group. So they've got a delicate self-esteem and sense of confidence. So that's where we need to be careful. We don't want to compare them to their peers. They want to be recognized on an individual basis. And I think this is where 4-H leaders can play such an important role. When we're noticing something about them that is special, unique, if they've got a skill, if we can call attention to that on an individual basis, sometimes just one little comment starts off a whole chain of events. So recognizing the power you have with this age group to really cement some positive characteristics for them is something that you have the ability to do. So now we're talking about young teens, looking at kind of that junior high age demographic, 12 through 14. And we know, we all remember junior high, I'm sure. It's not an area of time that we forget about. But rapid physical change, growth spurts, often girls are maturing earlier than boys. But the onset of some big hormonal swings in our lives, whether that's through attitude, feelings, interests, and we're starting to see more interest in sports and other games, getting to be maybe a little more physically active, joining teams. So on the physical side, we see those things. On the intellectual side, they're interested in youth-centered solutions. Because that self-awareness has started to grow, they want to know what's in this for me and how's this going to affect me. They can understand more abstract and hypothetical thoughts. So this is where we start to bring in some of those leadership development content pieces, because they can start to understand, okay, hypothetically, if this happened, here's how it might affect X, Y, or Z. Prior to this age group, those pieces are going to be hard to bring in. So I think this is for me, a big one, knowing that this is the age group where we can start to cover some of those topics. And they're able to plan and evaluate their own work at this age. So we start to see them step away and not need as much adult direction when they get to this young teen age group. So as a project leader, maybe your role shifts from I'm directing you and how you do this to I'm going to help you figure out how you want to get started, knowing that you've got this and I'm here to support you and help you. So our role just kind of shifts a little bit. On the social side, they're very much interested and concerned with their public appearance, their peer interactions. They're looking for approval from their peers, not really so much looking on approval from the adults. And I think this can be hard when you've got a strong relationship with the youth and they transition into this age demographic, because in some ways, in my experience, they start to feel a little bit distant because they're more concerned with peer relationships and less concerned with the adult relationship that they had with you. But recognizing that that's developmentally where they need to be and appropriate for them, and they'll swing back around. They'll be back and they'll remember that you care about them. Okay. But knowing that this age group, they need to be pushing for independence. That's what's appropriate for them. So they're interested in activities that involve a mixed group. So recognizing in your club settings or project meetings that that's what they're looking for. They want to be involved in mixed groups. They're curious about other people. But knowing on an emotional level, they're going to be struggling with self-esteem, self-confidence. They're going to be critical of themselves. And we need to recognize that internal monologue that they might be having. I specifically remember growing up in the church that I was in, when you went through confirmation class, you had to be an acolyte at the same time. And what I learned in child development, I totally realized this as an adult looking back, but it's like, yeah, it feels like you're on a stage in these years, these young teen years or even mid-teen years. It feels like you're on a stage and everyone's watching every little thing that you're doing. But when I got to be an acolyte, our church had this little note on the back of the door right before you walked out that said 95% of the people in this church are not going to notice if you make a mistake. And I really appreciated that note. It still sticks with me now. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes, that it's like, even if I make a mistake, most people aren't noticing or paying attention. And I think that's a message that we need to keep telling this age group. You might feel like the world's a stage. You might feel like everyone's watching and noticing if you stumble, but for the most part, they're not, and people care. But those hormone changes sometimes make it hard for that reasoning to really stick, right? We've got volatile emotions, and we're trying to balance the sense of independence that we feel like we need to have with the sense of reliance that we have because we can't do everything for ourselves. And that's tough. That's tough. You could not pay me to go back to being 12 to 14 years old. So let's change to middle teens. So on the physical side, for some of our teens, this is going to be the end of puberty. For others, it might still be the middle of puberty. But recognizing that some are still going to be rapidly changing, but almost all of them are going to be self-conscious of their body image. So as we're doing our programming, as we're leading clubs, making sure we're not calling attention to that. And we're speaking about that in a positive way, knowing that there are going to be self-conscious feelings attached. On the intellectual side, they've been practicing the logic, they've been practicing the reasoning, the abstract thinking, the problem solving. So making sure that we're helping them practice that as well. They're invested in community well-being, so this is a good time to bring about some community service projects and getting their input on what their community needs, because they're interested in others. This is a great time in their lives to capitalize on their idealistic nature, how they want the world to be. They've got a development of their personal philosophy and self-knowledge. So they're starting to figure out, who am I going to be in this world? And you can play a role in helping them to figure that out. They're starting to prepare for life changes, and they may be looking to adults for some guidance. Okay. So that's another place that we can play a role. How can our sparks that we formed in 4-H connect to careers that we could have in the future? On the social side, they're looking for status among their peer group. They want to be recognized for who they are. They're interested in developing relationships, whether that be on a platonic scale or on a romantic side. They're seeking leadership roles, and that's where I think we as club leaders can make sure that we're providing them the recognition that they're looking for, that we're setting them up to practice some of those skills and keeping them engaged. They're seeking belonging and individual recognition. They want to feel like they're a part of something. But recognizing on the emotional side that there's some imposter syndrome at play, that the self-esteem is still going to be questionable at this point as they're working towards independence on an individual basis. And so recognizing that they might not feel like they're good at things, or may not feel like they have attained the status to take a leadership role. And that's where we can play a role in helping them to see that they are ready. Or maybe they need practice, and we can help them find the practice that they need. So we need to make sure that we're supporting that emotional piece as they're moving forward on the intellectual and social pieces. And then lastly, we've got our late teens. So looking at our seniors who are leaving our 4-H program, for most of them, growth has tapered off, but their brain is still developing. So the research tells us that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until more like 25 or 26. So their brains are still developing for years yet from this point. And we can play our part in making sure that they are learning how to make good decisions and making the best decisions they can for their futures. On the intellectual side, their future goals are important. And if they're a part of any public school system, this is probably being shoved down their throats at this point in their lives. Future, future, future. Where are you going to college? What are you doing after high school? So it's going to be a main topic for them. And we can do our part to support them in that as well, and figuring out how to make those connections and how to connect to their interests. At this point in time, they've had the ability to build some of their planning and leadership skills. So as a project leader or a club leader, it's good to capitalize on it at this point. On the social side, their relationships are shifting. They might feel like they need adult support when they're making those big decisions, but also they've got a sense of independence, and they're going to have to make the decisions that are going to be best for them. So figuring out what your role is in their decision-making process is going to be important depending upon the individual youth. And on the emotional side, they're ready to be treated like adults. And this can be hard. This can be hard, but it's important for us to make sure that we're respecting their maturity and independence that they've been developing, and giving them some opportunities to show the leadership and planning abilities that they've developed. So the implications of this, if we have a mismatch between where they're at in ages and stages and the practices that we're using within our programs or within our club meetings, if that mismatch is there, it can decrease engagement in the project, club, or activity if they don't feel like what's being provided to them is fitting them or appropriate to them. It might stunt their relationship development with their peers if they feel like a mismatch is there and they're not having the experiences that's appropriate to them. And it's going to limit the relationship potential that they have with that caring adult. And so examples of a mismatch might be if we have those older teens that want to be treated as adults and we're not treating them as such, then that's going to limit their ability to build a relationship with us. It might decrease their engagement in the project that we're trying to lead because they're not feeling like they're being respected. On the flip side of that, if we've got young ones, on the early childhood side that need to be physically kept engaged, they need movement, they need transition, and we're asking them to sit and listen for an hour, that's going to decrease their engagement. That's going to limit their desire to come back and try again. So we want to make sure that we're taking these pieces in mind as we're planning our programs, as we're planning our club meetings, to try to make this as engaging as we possibly can. So I've got a few practice scenarios that I thought you guys can kind of help me work through, because a lot of these, there are lots of different things that we can do that might make it a good situation, especially depending on your project or your club experience. So in practice scenario number 1, you are a project leader planning a workshop that's targeting Clover kids. What can you do to match this age and stage as you're planning your project workshop? So any ideas from the group?
I know they have some, Jen, because they've had some really great input this week. So feel free to unmute, and some of you prefer the chat box. Either way is great.
I would say hands-on activities to keep their bodies, hands, and minds busy while still engaging in learning.
Yeah, definitely. If we can find a way to make sure that the project that we're working on is hands-on, that's going to be one way to keep them moving, give them that tactile experience that they need. Work on those fine and gross motor skills as well if we're keeping things hands-on. I see a response in the chat saying several different project stations to move around to. So maybe we're having shorter, smaller pieces that they can rotate around, and just to keep them up, keep them moving, keep things fresh. Knowing that sticking to one thing and doing one thing the whole time is probably not going to keep them engaged. I saw Becky, you unmuted. Did you have something to add too?
I think Marcia did. Marcia, do you want to share?
Well, I was going to say the same as that the first lady did, but also like if you're cooking, it doesn't work to have them take turns and making one thing. It works better for them all to have their own thing. So let's say that you're making, well, it'd be better to be making trail mix or something, or be making, everybody have their own bowl and everybody be making their own batch, so that you do that. Or if you're sewing, that everybody has their own little project. We're all making needle books, and so everybody has their own, and they aren't trying to do something together, so that they all have their own little hands-on, like you said. That's just real important to have hands-on and busyness. And I think that at this age, you've really got to keep the fun part in, the game and the fun part, and you've got to keep that business part of 4-H just almost non-existent for them. They can't pay attention to that business part of 4-H at all, hardly.
And I think you're right on, Marcia, in terms of that foods workshop example that you gave. that they're so interested in process more than they're interested in product. They want to be doing it. They want to be a part of every part of it. So asking them to take turns and maybe only get to do one thing while they're watching 10 other things happen is not going to be engaging to them in the way that, you know, if we're matching the recipe to the age group and giving them something that they can complete themselves 100% of the way, that's going to set them up better for success. So trail mix is a great example of that. If we're not having to use sharp knives or heat, there's no reason why that Clover kid cannot complete every segment of that themselves.
That's right.
All right, so let's try practice number 2.
Oh, hey, Jen, there's something in the chat here, right? So
Okay.
Janine mentioned one thing I'm trying to do better about is talking to our older youth and let them know what we are asking of them so they can help the younger youth. When the older ones know what is expected, it helps them help execute what we are working on. So that's a really great example of pairing older youth with younger youth.
Yeah, which I think one of our other practices, I think you're just like a little bit ahead of me. So you're our club leader planning a warm up for our next meeting. How do you keep your teams engaged? And I think you're right on, Janine, that like we need to make sure that they feel like they have a leadership role and they feel like they're in on it a little bit, that they have maybe some extra information so that they can feel like they have a part to take on and take care of. And I think that is so incredibly helpful. So what are some other ideas that you guys have in terms of how do you keep teens engaged, knowing what we know about their ages and stages?
Well, I always have them lead the meeting. They take care of the business meeting, and that they like that because they can get it done quicker and as fast as they want to. They like that. And also I've learned that they like taking care of the recipes too. I mean, if we're cooking, even if it's something that I am teaching them, they like to be in charge and only have me step in when it's a step they don't know. Like if we're making bread, well, they know how to measure flour and they know how to, but then they don't know how to knead the dough. So then I step in and teach that step. Or they don't know how to shape the roll. Well, then I step in and teach that. But they like to handle it themselves in, measuring the flour, measuring the amount, getting the right utensils, doing all that. They take care of all that. And then when I need to step in and teach part of it, then I step in and they lead it all.
Very good, Marcia. Yeah, I think that's definitely connecting to our age and stage. So we look at our middle teens and our late teens, and they want to be able to take on some pieces. They want to plan, they want to provide that leadership, and they're really looking to practice their independence. So how can we support them as adults while giving them some freedom to exercise those skills? And I think you're right on in doing that. And I think in some ways, if you're planning a warm up, or I could describe that as an icebreaker, we call them warm ups more often and within our internal 4-H side, but that's something that we could even hand off to a teen, right? For this meeting, you're going to be in charge of leading a warm up and giving them a little control, a little authority to take that and practice their independence and practice their leadership skills.
Oh, my guessing jar is my warm up basically. And I almost never do anything with that anymore because they want to take it over. They want to know who won and they want to announce the winners. And so right away, I mean, when they come in, they take care of it. So I don't even do that anymore. That's the things that they know. And even the life challenge question that we just do every time, they kind of handle that anymore with the younger kids, and they just say, well, no, this is what we're doing, and they explain it to the younger kids. I don't have to do much of that anymore because it's a routine. So both of those icebreaker things that we do at every meeting have been taken over by the older ones because they know it now. so we have that routine that they handle, you know.
That's incredible. You must be really inspiring some leadership, Marcia. That's great. All right, so let's move on to practice question number 3. So your club has a nice variety of ages and stages. How do we plan for them all? Because for most of our practice, we've been thinking about a specific age or a specific stage, but especially in our club settings, we're not usually just focusing on one particular age, unless your county specifically has maybe a Clover Kid club. But how do we keep everybody engaged?
Well, I divide them up. I'll have the older kids downstairs doing what they're interested in, which was making bread. The younger kids, they wanted to cook too, so they were at the table making cookies because that's where they're at with 101. And so we just have to divide them. They cannot do the same activities. It's just not even possible. The other thing I really do is I hold workshops, and I just say, you know, come to my house at, you know, we're doing a workshop on making a tote bag. And because obviously the older kids don't need any of that, but the younger kids have to have that. And so we have workshops, and they come to my house, and I do that. I'm retired. I'm able to have workshops when it's convenient for them. So I've had to do that in as one way to meet that need.
Sometimes we can divide them, but sometimes it might not be suitable to break up our groups. So does anyone else have any ideas of what are some things that we can do if we are in a situation where maybe we can't divide out into different age groups? Oops. Well, coming back to Janine's comment about helping our older youth so that they can help our younger youth. Scaffolding is one technique that I like to use. And so the idea of scaffolding is simply that you're pairing an older youth with a younger youth. And it kind of does a couple things. One is that our younger youth, we know from ages and stages, they look up to our older youth. So there's already that natural connection there that they're looking up to that older youth anyway. So if that older youth can make that connection and provide some of that learning content for them, that younger youth is going to learn something simply because they're looking up to that older youth. But there's something to be gained for that older youth as well. And I'm specifically going to use goat showmanship as an example. So I have a senior goat showman, and they're showing a junior goat showman maybe some finer tips on showmanship skills. That younger showman is going to learn something by looking up to that older showman. But the older showman is also going to learn something, because maybe this is something that they've become very good at, but if they've taken the time to really examine how they do things or why they do things, oftentimes having to teach someone else how we do something is going to give us a moment to kind of have that pause and that self-reflection and say, but why am I doing this the way that I'm doing this? Did someone tell me to do it this way? How did I get to this point, and how can I teach them to get to this point? And when we're teaching someone something we already know, that further cements that knowledge for us.
Mm-hmm.
That older youth has something to gain from that experience as well. And so I think when we can bring in, especially in that club setting, when we can bring in some of that scaffolding, that can be really beneficial to the older youth. It gives them a chance to practice their leadership skills, their communication skills. It gives them the opportunity to be independent, while also giving that younger youth the chance to learn something in a way that I don't know a lot about goat showmanship. So I am glad I have senior exhibitors that are happy to mentor those younger ones, and recognizing that 4-H is such a broad experience that for us as staff, or for those of you who are club leaders, we're not likely to be experts in everything there is to know in 4-H. So how can we take advantage of our youth who might know something that we don't, and give them a chance to develop?
That's for sure. That's right. Mhm.
So
Well,
any
and
other ideas? Oh, sorry, Marcia.
well, yeah, I always used our one of our 4-Hers. He was a photography, and so he always led the photography project. I know nothing about photography, so he always led our photography workshops, and he taught the others in photography, and he did all the activities in photography because he knew about that, and now we have somebody that is really has excelled in sewing, and so she leads that, and so we do have that is you really, if you pay attention, those older ones have developed some really fine skills that you can you can really take advantage of and piece work with and enrich the younger kids. And like you say, the younger kids just really that's who they don't want to listen to the leaders. They want to listen to the kids.
And Marcia, that's a really good point that it does make your life as a volunteer a little easier too, right? When you have
Oh,
these
yeah.
local experts at your disposal to really enrich your 4-H experience and make the load lighter for you as well.
Oh, sure. That's right. For sure. You're right. Mhm.
That was the end of my practice questions. And before I open up for your questions, I did want to share that if this is something that you're interested in keeping as a resource, so if you wanted to have a printout that you could store with your club or project leader materials, because like I said, I come back to this again and again as I'm thinking about, okay, I'm planning a project for fourth graders. What do I need to remember about fourth graders to make sure I'm making this the best possible experience I can for them? I go back to this Ages and Stages document frequently. And so I've included the link there. If you want to go back, this is a North Central region. So this isn't even just Nebraska. This is a resource that's shared by some of our neighboring states as well. To make sure that we're thinking about how does this affect where they are developmentally, and back to that disclaimer at the beginning, recognizing that every youth is going to develop at their own pace. So this is just simply what's kind of average and what's typical to help you plan for youth in that age group. So do you have questions regarding your own project or club leading and how that might be impacted by Ages and Stages?
As a can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, Alyssa.
Okay. So as Jen knows, I am new at all this, going through the volunteer stuff. So when you sent over the roster, it's really good because now I can see kind of how many kids, and we have a lot of Clover kids, a lot of younger kids. So I'm excited to meet some of the older youth to help the younger kids with showing them new things, how the static projects work and stuff like that. So hopefully before fair, I can get them together and they can kind of show the older ones can show the younger kids what they've done over the course of years and what they can do as Clover kids, and going on from there and learning what each kid has on specific. It's nice because Look County is a small county, so there's not as many. So I'm just excited, and this will really help me kind of figure out what works for our club. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Alyssa. I mean, taking the time to really stop and look at our roster and kind of take stock of, okay, this is where we're at. Here are the ages that we're working with. How can we try to make this the best experience for the group that we have? Knowing that that's going to change a little bit from year to year, depending upon your club or your county, and really taking stock of that. And I think sometimes I kind of fall into this. I get really involved with our quilting program here that we have in GLW. And sometimes it sneaks up on you when they move a developmental stage and you think, oh, well, so-and-so, they can't be at this stage already, And so sometimes we have to stop and remind ourselves, no, they've been growing and they've been developing, and I need to give them credit and respect for that. Even if we maybe begrudgingly watch them grow up sometimes.
Yep.
Any other questions that you guys have specifically about ages and stages?
Well, I have a 4-H'er who, well, and I've seen it before, where they kind of think they've outgrown 4-H. They're kind of think, oh, I've done everything. I'm older now. I maybe have outgrown this business of 4-H. And I feel challenged to make them, to help them see that there is so much more when they've gotten caught up in the high school and the sports and the things that they're doing that way, that they don't feel like I don't know, they feel bored with, I don't know, the same old things. And I don't know, they act that way. I don't know if they really feel that way or not, but they sure act that way, so they think they're bored. They've outgrown it somehow.
Yeah, I think we've probably all had some situations like that. And I use prom as my example. In our neck of the woods, our schools are small enough that you get to go to prom when you're a freshman. It's not like you have to wait until you're a junior to go to prom. And the school I grew up in, you had to be a junior to go to prom, right? And here it's like prom isn't really that special because, well, I get to go every year of high school. But when you have to wait till you're a junior to go to prom, it seems a little bit more special. And sometimes I think we have a little bit of that in 4-H, right? If I have access to all of these opportunities and resources when I'm 8 or I'm 12 or I'm 14, then what makes it new, different, or special when I'm 16, 17, 18?
That's a good.
And so I think that's where it kind of comes back to that leadership piece. How are we recognizing them as an individual? How are we taking advantage of their specific skills and interests? How are we making them feel independent, that they have some power over their future? And I think for some, they might be captured by interests outside of 4-H, and maybe that's recognizing that they've been given some power and opportunities within 4-H. But hopefully there's a way we can connect them so that they recognize that my journey's not done. I've been given so much, now how can I give back?
Yeah, Jen, that's a really great point. And Marcia, we know that's common and it happens, especially as youth start to begin to age out and they are suddenly, making decisions regarding their future, and they may not necessarily think that 4-H is a priority still. But something to keep in mind, though, especially from a volunteer perspective, is that you've had an opportunity to work with this youth for hopefully a period of time in which you have provided opportunities for them to have a sense of belonging, have some engagement opportunities with you, also have a wide range of experiences. And hopefully that is giving them a spark to say, I've learned this skill or I've had this experience and I'm going to take that to the next level. And if that doesn't include 4-H, that is okay. They're going to take that into maybe an officer position in an organization in their local school. They may take that into some sort of a breed association role, or maybe even an internship or a job. And so, think about how, youth can choose to go in and out of our program. It's the idea that we are giving them the opportunity to grow and have all kinds of experiences when they're here.
Thank you for those thoughts. I appreciate that encouragement to look at it that way, because I needed that. Thank you.
You are welcome, Marcia. All right, Jen. How about we stop the recording, and you and I can stay on if there's any additional questions that someone might want to ask after the recording is finished. Thanks for being here, everyone, today. Thank you for serving as a 4-H volunteer in your local county and communities, and for making these 4-H experiences happen day in and day out. And we hope that you've learned something new over the course of this week with our 4-H Lunch and Learn. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Oh, and Jill, do we have a post survey?
We do. I was getting so excited to stop my share or stop the recording that I forgot. Thank you, Jen. All
You
right,
bet.
here's a quick question here at the end. We have the same question. So now that we've had this wonderful presentation from Jen, please rate your level of confidence using the ages and stages to plan 4-H experiences. I'm seeing some got this already come in here, Jen, already for
Good.
3. Also, we have some people rating themselves as a 4. And so we're seeing quite a bit of growth today, which is fantastic.
Well, good. We just want you guys to feel like you've got the confidence and the tools to do great things. So let us know
Yeah.
how we can support you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you for voting and thanks for sharing of what you've learned over our lunch and learn here today. So now we can say thank you and bid you farewell and having a great rest of your Thursday. Jen and I will stay on if there's any questions.